The birth of this white woman's daughter was supposed to bring great joy to her and her husband, but it brought big trouble because the baby was black, whereas the couple was white. Several years later, the husband sobbed profusely when the reason behind the baby's black skin was revealed. Carol could feel her baby was ready to arrive despite the doctor's prediction that the due date was still a week away. She was home alone, with no one around to help. Her husband, Andrew, was at work and wouldn't be back for another 5 hours. The housekeeper who assisted Carol twice a week wasn't scheduled to come that day, leaving her to face the moment entirely on her own. Carol took a deep breath, determined not to panic. Maybe she was overreacting, she told herself. After all, her water hadn't broken yet. Perhaps the baby wasn't coming just yet. Though this was her first pregnancy, it didn't always feel that way. She had spent years preparing for this moment, immersing herself in books about pregnancy, watching countless videos, visiting friends with babies, and holding on to the hope that her time would come. Now, as the possibility became a reality, she tried to stay calm. Carol had read and heard countless stories from other women about how they just knew when labor was imminent, a gut feeling that couldn't be ignored. That same instinct gripped her now, leaving her uneasy. Unwilling to wait for things to escalate before seeking help, Carol picked up the phone and called the midwife from the hospital where she had attended her prenatal classes. The midwife treated Carol's case as an emergency and washed over with an ambulance. Shortly after they loaded Carol into the ambulance, her water broke and intense labor pains gripped her. She had her baby in the ambulance before they arrived at the hospital. Carol was drenched in sweat, but she was relieved and full of joy. Carol's baby looked pink and healthy, but when she was wrapped in a shawl and handed to her for the first time, Carol noticed the baby's dark-tipped ears and eyelids, leaving her shocked. She nervously asked the midwife if it was normal for a baby with two white parents to have darker features. The midwife shook her head sympathetically, sensing Carol's fear of how her husband, Andrew, might react. Trying to ease her worries, the midwife encouraged Carol to focus on her safe delivery and get some rest, assuring her she could feed her baby after a nap. A few hours later, as Carol breastfed her newborn for the first time, Andrew burst into the room, beaming with excitement. The midwife had called to share the good news. He kissed Carol's forehead tenderly before glancing at the baby in her arms. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual, his joy radiating unbroken. He was happy to hear she was a baby girl. It had always been his dream to have a girl as his firstborn. However, there was an expression on Carol's face that made him pause. He asked what the matter was, and she shook her head, saying it was nothing. Unwilling to break the bubble of happiness that we're presently wrapped in, Andrew pushed, afraid that Carol was hiding a health complication she had incurred during labor and childbirth. Carol quickly reassured Andrew that she was in good health, but added there was something else he needed to know. With trembling hands, she pulled back the shawl from the baby's head, revealing the darkened areas on the ears and neck. Andrew frowned in confusion, unable to grasp the significance. "Is something wrong with the baby?" he asked. Carol shook her head slowly. "Nothing is wrong with her, not in the way you think," she said softly. Taking a deep breath and sending a silent prayer upward, she finally told him the truth. Their newborn daughter, Nicole, had black or mixed race features. Andrew's mind raced with questions, his thoughts spiraling. How could this happen? Did this mean he wasn't Nicole's biological father? His heart sank as doubts flooded in. Was Carol confessing to infidelity? His face fell, and the weight of the moment bore down on him like a crushing tide. "Did you cheat on me, Carol?" he asked, his voice breaking. He asked, giving voice to the doubt that swirled in his head. With tears in his eyes, Carol shook her head. "I would never. Why would I when you're the only man I want?" Andrew didn't believe her. He felt she was lying to save her skin. Suddenly, the air in the room felt too thick. It was suffocating, and he pulled at the tie around his neck. Unable to stay near the woman he believed had betrayed him, Andrew fled the hospital. Carol, devastated, focused on her newborn, forcing herself to stay present and sending silent prayers that Andrew would return, ready to talk over a day passed with no word from him. Carol grew increasingly worried. Where was he? Why hadn't he reached out? She hoped he was taking time to process everything rationally, as he always had. But as the silence stretched on, her concern deepened. Her calls went straight to voicemail, and her texts pleading for him to talk were ignored. Desperate, she sent an email, certain he would see it. When his reply finally came, Carol read it with trembling hands and almost wished he hadn't responded at all. You've broken my trust, and it can never be recovered. You've shattered my faith in you. I'll never be the same, and with your own hands and your actions, you've turned me into someone I can barely recognize. Now you'll live with the consequences. The email read. Goosebumps appeared on Carol's skin. She felt a drastic shift in her entire universe. Andrew abandoned reason, punishing Carol for something she hadn't done. Holding Nicole close, Carol whispered promises to protect her, though she had no idea how. After 5 years of marriage without working or supporting herself, she felt helpless. What should have been a joyous day had turned into a nightmare. For 5 childless years, Carol and Andrew had been best friends and lovers. Their marriage was built on trust and peace. An affair was unthinkable, especially given Carol's disability. She almost wished they'd remained childless to avoid this devastation. Yet, as she looked at her sleeping baby, Carol knew she would endure anything to protect Nicole. Accepting that Andrew wouldn't come for her, she turned to the midwife for help. The kind woman agreed to help and drove Carol and Nicole home in her car after her shift was over. It had been 2 days since Carol gave birth. The house was oddly silent. Carol assumed that it was because Andrew was still at work. She slid into her wheelchair and talked about putting the house in order. She tried not to do too much so that her strength wouldn't deplete. As a person living with her condition, she had to be mindful of her health and energy levels all the time. By the time Andrew came home from work that day, Nicole was sound asleep. The house was welcoming, and there was food served for him on the table. Andrew stormed in and roused Carol from her much-needed sleep on the couch. Startled, she masked her fear and calmly asked about his day. In a rage, he flipped the center table, shattering a glass vase. Carol flinched, but Andrew, breathing heavily, remained unmoved. Pointing at her, he warned that things would change. Though divorce crossed his mind, he dismissed it, fearing judgment for abandoning his dependent, disabled wife. Moreover, his workplace favored married men, and staying married suited his interests better, for now. Carol expected to feel relief when Andrew said he wouldn't abandon her. It meant that there was still a chance that they could work things out, but she felt trepidation and a deep sense of foreboding. It was true that she was totally dependent upon Andrew. A few weeks before the wedding, many years ago, Carol had been involved in a tragic skiing accident that affected the base of her spine. Carol's paralysis was the result of a skiing accident, for which Andrew felt deeply guilty, having persuaded her to try despite her reluctance. Despite her paralysis, he loved her deeply and married her, building a mostly harmonious life together. Her beauty had always captivated him, and her dependence reassured him that she was his alone. However, the sight of Carol's black baby shattered his pride. Feeling betrayed, he convinced himself that his love and care had not been enough, and that her attractiveness made an affair plausible. Yet, despite his anger and wounded pride, Andrew still loved her. But he hated her at the same time for what he thought she'd done. That was why he couldn't send her away. But he chose to do everything in his power to frustrate her. The next day, Carol started witnessing another part of Andrew that she didn't know existed. Whenever he was home, she was visibly scared, and he smirked whenever he saw it. Andrew tormented Carol relentlessly, stopping short of physical violence, but making her life miserable. He insulted her, destroyed household items, and ruined her clothes for no reason. Meals she prepared were met with scorn, often ignored or thrown to the ground. Even baby Nicole wasn't spared. He ignored her cries, threatened Carol to quiet her, and left her terrified. As Nicole grew, her light-skinned black appearance only fueled Andrew's hostility. He shouted at her, sent her on pointless errands, and, despite Carol's pleas, enrolled her in a predominantly white school. When Carol suggested a black school, Andrew cruelly refused, declaring, "A white person's child belongs in a white person's school." Nicole's life in school was rough. She was constantly confronted with several racist situations bordering on bullying. There were days she approached her locker and found mocking graffiti drawn on it. Another day, she found her books shredded. They even pushed her from behind a few times, and she fell and hurt herself. Nicole faced relentless bullying, labeled a freak, and told to join the other freaks. Despite insisting she was fully white like her parents, no one believed her. Carol reassured Nicole that Andrew was her father, though he denied it. Nicole saw the resemblance in the mirror and in photos, and others often said she looked more like Andrew than Carol. Determined to help her, Carol secretly saved money and transferred Nicole to a predominantly black school, ready to face Andrew's anger. Embracing her new environment, Nicole identified as black, thriving in her new school. She made friends, excelled in theater, and won a prestigious sponsorship to travel the world with a theater company. Nicole just finished high school when this happened, and began traveling the world, performing as a black person. Their company was widely successful, and Nicole was happy to finally find the community. 2 years later, Carol called Nicole to tell her that Andrew had an accident. Fortunately, Nicole was in the next city. Nicole visited the hospital where Andrew was admitted, doing so only for her mother's sake. She had little fondness for Andrew due to his treatment of her and Carol over the years. While at the hospital, it was revealed there was a shortage of O-positive blood, which Andrew urgently needed. Nicole stepped forward, mentioning that she was O-positive, and agreed to be tested against Andrew's blood. The match was so precise that the doctor remarked it could only be explained by a father-daughter relationship. To confirm, he ran a paternity test, which revealed that Andrew was indeed Nicole's biological father. Both Nicole and Carol were stunned. They had never considered running a paternity test in all those years. Intrigued and wanting to uncover more, they requested the doctor to perform a DNA ancestry test on their family. The results revealed that Andrew had 33% African ancestry, despite appearing fully white. Carol had 12%, while Nicole, who looked black, carried 25% African genes. The doctor explained that Nicole's appearance was due to genetic atavism, an ancestral throwback. This meant she resembled her black great-great-grandparents, whose presence in the family lineage had largely been forgotten. When Andrew fully regained consciousness, the doctor explained everything to him. Overwhelmed with emotion, he broke down in tears, sobbing over the realization of how blind and cruel he had been to his family for the past 20 years. He mourned the countless days of turmoil he had caused, knowing they had never experienced true peace because of him. With heartfelt remorse, he pleaded with Nicole and Carol for forgiveness. They told him it would take time, given all the pain he had inflicted on them. Determined to make amends, Andrew vowed to dedicate every day of the rest of his life to earning their trust and repairing the damage he had done. I'm really keen to know your thoughts on this story, so please don't hesitate to share your insights in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and found it engaging, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more similar content. Feel free to share this video. Take good care of yourselves, and I'm excited to connect with you in our future videos.